Greetings and welcome. I'm Daniel Jacobson, professor of philosophy here at CU Boulder and director of the Benson Center for the Study of Western Civilization. Our mission is to promote the study of Western civilization and to increase intellectual and political diversity on campus. Welcome to our event. Tonight it's my great pleasure to introduce Stan Husi. He is a professor of philosophy at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, works on a range of topics, mostly in PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics, but today he's going to be talking about something completely different, about humor. So it's my pleasure to introduce Stan, who's going to be talking about the ill humor of the humor guard. Please join me in welcoming Stan Husi.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan, for the nice introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to give a talk here. And thank everybody to tune in. The topic is the ill humor of the humor guard. The agenda. Big picture. I'm a big picture guy. The book, the thesis, 3 analogies, humor seriously, the haters, the shocker, analysis, some laughter, and I'm hoping to leave you all in good humor. So I'm working on this book. I've been working on this book for a while. It is coming, I promise it is coming. The first time I introduced some ideas of this book was here at the Benson Center a year ago. I like the title Curb Your Moral Enthusiasm, but I'm not sure it works as a book title. It's kind of too clunky. So I have to find a more serviceable title. What could that title be? The moral problem? I want to begin my remarks here with a book review. The book The Moral Problem by Michael Smith, and the review is The Meta-Ethical Problem by Jeff Seymour. In the book, A Philosophical Hit of the Noughties, Michael Smith sets out to explain, in a nutshell, how there can be moral truth that can motivate us in the right way. You gotta give to famine relief, that's a fact. Now somehow this truth, at least when duly recognized, must get you to actually give to famine relief. The recognition can't just sit there, so to speak, for free, but really gotta cost you. You can't just file it away to practical oblivion, carrying on with whatever you were carrying on. We do this kind of thing with all sorts of similar recognitions, like something being illegal or unfashionable or whatever. How does Smith explain why moral truths are different? It's complicated. A good deal of magical thinking is going on. In the review, Seymour, who's a close friend of Smith, explains pretty convincingly why Smith doesn't really pull off the magical trick here after all. But before he sets out on his devastating critique, Seymour takes issue with the title. Quote, "When I think of what might count as a moral problem," he writes, "I think of rampant cruelty, systematic moral injustice, moral indifference, maybe even the paltry supply of simply human decency. Smith's problem," he concludes, "is not a moral problem, let alone the moral problem." I love that twist. But another reading of Smith's title doesn't even occur to Seymour. What is the moral problem? Morality is the problem. As a formula, the so-and-so called problem would suggest so-and-so is the problem. The crime problem is a problem about too much crime, not how to make crime more powerful. The poverty problem is a problem about poverty. The plastic problem is about too much plastic. All right. So that's the moral problem, how I would like to use it. That sounds a little bit boring. But what is the moral problem? What I have in mind is the moral intrusion or encroachment or moral hegemony into almost every aspect of our lives. The morality system has the inherent tendency to intrude into every social aspect. If you think the personal is political, that's for wimps. Now, absolutely everything under the sun is a moral issue. The boundless intrusiveness is not just costly, but moralizing X has a tendency of ecologically transforming X. Consider the opening statement of a very famous book on justice. Justice is the first virtue of social institutions as truth is of systems of thought. A theory, however elegant and economical, must be rejected or revised if it is untrue. Likewise, laws and institutions, no matter how efficient and well-arranged, must be reformed or abolished if they are unjust. As an expression of the boundless ambitions of justice, John Rawls' words hit the mark, for sure. As a statement of the total subordination of institutions across the board, they are truly terrifying. Institutions are not like theories. They are not devoted to any single first or second or third virtue. Before anything else, before serving any such master virtue, they simply are, having grown over time, been maintained by people who involve their lives and activities with them in various ways. Some, like the KKK, for sure, are so egregiously unjust that they must be dissolved. But many exist like the lilies in the field, little platoons, germs of public affection. And one such little platoon I'm intimately familiar with is the classical choir. Over the years, I've been intimately involved with choirs in Winsbach and Tübingen, Germany, Houston, Texas, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and even to my great pride, the Chicago Symphony. Friendship have evolved, choir engagements have brought me from Beijing, China to Jerusalem, Israel. I sang songs in Tel Aviv one night and West Jordan the next. I met my wife while en route to a concert of my boys' choir in Chicago. I quite intuitively understand the concept of transformative experience, as no music consumption can possibly enable one to anticipate the intensity of music production. One thing I can say for sure and without qualification is that in over 30 years, racism was never part of the experience, except perhaps in the sense of transforming racism. The first performance of a German choir in Jerusalem of Bach's St. Matthew's Passion was such a transformative experience. And the dislocation of a group of German teenagers in West Jordan who were held back to the lodge in Israel by Palestinian bakers, the only shop we could find was open at 3 a.m., to whom we sang some German Volkslieder in gratitude was another. When I hear Rawls' injunction that institutions, no matter how efficient and well-arranged, must be reformed or abolished if they are unjust, especially in the face of ever-expanding notions of injustice, I tremble. One such notion is, of course, racial equity. And consequently, the Milwaukee Symphony was subjected to mandatory DEI training recently, investigating why the symphony fails racial equity. But what we do has nothing to do with race. It is all about music. We voluntarily assemble to produce beautiful music. There's camaraderie, lasting friendship are formed, and choice, mingling of voices. Politics mostly stays outside in the Wisconsin cold. One of these overreaches I want to call Puritan excesses. All right, so that's going to be the term I'm going to use. It's a technical term, I suppose. In the past few years, we have witnessed an insane moral panic. Puritan excesses are legion, interconnected, and affect virtually every corner of the social world. This is unsustainable, and excessive moralizing needs to be reined in. I'm not going to give many examples here. If you want to hear some more examples, I recommend you to these wonderful books. If I may just pick one of them, it would be the war on cooking and cuisine. It is amazing how many restaurants and culinary enterprises had to shut down because ethnic food of type X was prepared not by somebody belonging to ethnicity X. It's just amazing. To me, that seems utter insanity. All right. What is the question and the answer of my project? My question is, are these Puritan excesses exogenous or endogenous to the morality system? That is my question. And the answer I want to give, Puritan excesses are endogenous to the morality system. What is this endogenous, exogenous distinction amounting to? Puritan excesses would be exogenous if they were solely based on some moral confusion, generally bad moral thinking, bad moral interpretation, the impact of social media, political polarization, some bad manner in which the morality system currently and contingently manifests itself. I reject Puritan morals on the merits too, of course. I favor less excessive morals, and for which a persuasive case, I believe, can be made. What I deny, though, is that the inherent dynamics of the morality system bear no responsibility for Puritan excesses whatsoever. I deny the morality system could work at all without recruiting some elements that contain the threat of excessive tendency. We cannot blame Puritan excesses 100% on the Puritans. It's a feature, not a bug, and there are no simple fixes. It is not something that we can just shake off. Okay, it's not just a infection, if you wish, that can be so easily cured. All right, let me give you some analogies for what I have in mind here by endogenous and exogenous. Faith. Consider tight religious communities, for instance the Amish, whose very existence requires shared religious precepts, but people always and everywhere differ in outlook and temperament, even within tight communities. Centripetal and centrifugal forces must be carefully balanced. No tolerance-intolerance Goldilocks exists, and so the danger of becoming prosecutorial of heretics lies inherently in the system. It's a feature, not a bug. No simple fixes exist. Take power. Who guards the guardians? In framing a government which is to be administered by man over man, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. By granting the government power to police, you simultaneously grant it power to abuse. The dangers of power abuse are inherent in the system. They are endogenous, not just simply exogenous. All right. Now let me give you a contrasting analogy, the ideological capture of the academy. That seems to me exogenous. The completely one-sided control of the agenda is not rooted in the academic process as such. The best explanation for it, though complicated of course, is exogenous. A better, more viewpoint diverse, more open discussion-based academy seems entirely possible. It's not in the DNA of the academy as such to stifle debate. The academy may permit again that we also talk about Bruno. Okay. I hope that these analogies kind of like roughly illustrate what I have in mind. So I'm talking about these Puritan excesses as being endogenous to the morality system. And what I have in mind here by endogenous is the way in which the tendency to become prosecutorial of heretics is endogenous to religious systems. The tendency to abuse power is endogenous to power systems. But the one-sidedness of the academy is a kind of contingent feature that is, I can't quite see how that would be endogenous to the academic system. Even though, of course, some people have talked about the monasticism or whatnot of the academy, maybe sort of like, it's sort of like medieval history or whatnot, but ultimately I think that is just a infection. All right, let me turn to humor and morality. Thou shalt not joke about sacred cows, says Leibniz. Thou absolutely shalt joke about sacred cows, says the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury. And if you think that there is any correlation between the nationality and viewpoint of these figures, it is purely accidental. In fact, if you look at what the late Roger Scruton had to say, he is very much on the same board as Leibniz. All right. So let's talk about a spectrum. Okay. Much humor is evil, in bad taste, repulsive, beyond the pale, or what we say today, offensive. Anything does not go when it comes to jokes. I welcome the full weight of the morality system to come crushing down on some humor. If you were expecting an unqualified, across-the-board defense of humor against morality, you should not look to a German conservative professor. I'm sorry. I don't have a theory of sort of like where the line is, but I think there's a spectrum. And so if you look at the spectrum, I try to find some examples to illustrate it without falling prey to some use-mention difficulties. I don't want to make the same mistake as a professor made on teaching a course on offensive language and then mentioning offensive language and then getting into deep trouble for that. So you can read between the lines what I have in mind here. But let's just go on the spectrum from, let's say, the blue, I suppose, that's totally okay. The Book of Mormon, Curb Your Moral Enthusiasm, the analogy of Bush with a ape, that gets a little bit spicy. Minstrel shows clearly cross the line, if you wish. This destroy this mad brood is an enlist sign against the German Reich. I wish I could focus in and sort of enlarge the pickle head. Okay, so that's supposed to be a German soldier, all right? So since I'm German, I'm allowed to use that, I suppose. And then something like bear baiting, I think that is sort of perhaps one of the best examples. We would not tolerate that any longer. To entertain and poke jokes at animals in this way. All right. So I want to just stay at this slide for a second because I want to explain kind of what my concerns are with regard to the spectrum. As I said, I'm not a foe of the morality system. I'm not against moralizing humor per se. What I want to argue is that once you set the mechanism going, once you set the process going, in order to crush, let's say, what is on the red spectrum, you kind of set a dynamism into motion that is very, very hard to stop. And its tendency to just keep rolling on and on and on is a feature in the system. It is an endogenous aspect of the system. That is my thesis. I want to use moralizing humor as sort of my case study. That's what I'm using it for. I'm not that interested in philosophy of humor per se. I want to use it as a case study to illustrate the kind of concern that I want to express and explain in my book project. All right. We clearly went too far, no question. First, humor left the academy. Comedians dump college gigs. When did college lose its sense of humor? Or the Atlantic writes, that's not funny. Or we have, that's a very, not a very PC thing to say. Lots and lots of comedians have publicly stated that the academy college students is basically a no-go place to go. Too touchy. After the Academy, Hollywood was next. Comedies dropped from 25% to 8% in movie shares in a decade. The Hollywood Reporter reports, 10 years ago, comedy was king at the movie theater, and now comedy is having a terrible time getting traction. The last year comedies made more than $2 billion domestically was 2011. In 2009, they earned $2.5 billion. By 2050, comedy grosses were down to $1.4 billion. By 2019, comedies earned only $1 billion. Clearly, people are less inclined to touch this. It simply has become too costly. Just as well, say some people. Seth Simons, who edits a newsletter on humorism, reporting on labor inequality and extremism in the comedy industry, complains, the comedy industry covering inequality and extremism provides safe spaces for transgressive humor, helping to breed a hateful ideology. The words of comedy and the racist right overlap and reinforce each other. The origins of the far right and the revanchist right, with its credo of owning the libs in comedy, are ill appreciated, and thus it's easy to lose sight of the simple truth. Things are the way they are because people made them so. The far right did not come into being by chance, people shaped it. They went where they thought they could win people over, and they won people over. They offered permission to revel in racism and sexism, in homophobia and transphobia, and they earned devoted followings in return. They couldn't do so by alone, they had to be let in. So comedy is to blame. It's an interesting feature, by the way, by this article that Simons fell for a dupe. He reports on somebody who basically just trolled him as his primary witness. But you get the picture. It's also interesting to note, just aside, that some social scientists actually have investigated the correlation, let's say, between the prevalence of certain kind of like ethnic humor and the prevalence of ethnic oppression. And it turns out it does not correlate very well. It's actually like in times when you find the most intense, the most virulent ethnic oppression, you don't find that much ethnic humor. The ethnic humor often takes place in a transition where the ethnic oppression becomes less stringent. It's very interesting. So the causality does not quite work here. Well, just in case you were wondering what humorism is anyway, what is humorism? Humorism is about the dark side of the industry. It's about the immorality and corruption of the venue owners. It's about the way comedians and comedy spaces protect abuses. It's about the growing movement to make comedy racist again, and the genuine far-right extremists using comedy to spread their ideologies and build political power. It's about how comedy spaces treat the workers, how industry leaders responded to the pandemic and with reckless apathy. It's about the long history of abuse, of toxicity at Saturday Night Live, and the underappreciated power of SNL's creators. So if you want to learn more about humorism, Seth Simons has a newsletter there. You can sign up and you can find all the things that are wrong with the comedy industry. All right. I don't know about these correlations, but I'm pretty sure that this lady is not part of the far right.
I was doing two kisses. That's because you're back in Europe now.
Wow.
We do the two kiss of it.
Yeah, I loved it.
So do you live in the States now, Emily? You're married and you're living in the States now, is that right?
Yeah, I live in LA, most of the time.
And your husband is an actor as well?
He is, yes.
Is that how you perfected the American accent, having that going on at home?
Well, I thought I was quite good at it, and then I had a dialect coach for doing it for this movie that we're about to talk about. I had to do a Kansas accent, and my character lives on a farm.
So
I
how
can't
is
do
the
it.
sort of farm accent different to a town accent?
Well, I guess the farm accent sounds a little bit Midwest and Southern, a little bit Southerny.
Y'all like that?
Well, like, for example, we were filming in this really remote little town called Thibodeau. So we went out for dinner at Chili's, I think, which was the only restaurant
love
available.
Chili's.
Chili's is amazing.
You ever been to Chili's? Man,
Yeah.
when you go to Chili's, you can see why so many of our American friends are enormous. 'Cause I ordered a starter once and it was like 4 mini burgers, and they were as
Yeah.
big as proper burgers.
Yeah. Well, the girl who was serving me was enormous. You know, I think she got freebie meals at Chili's.
Nothing wrong with that.
And she comes up and she goes, "Did anyone ever tell you you look a lot like Emily Blunt?" And I said, "I have heard that, yes." And she went, "Are you Emily Blunt?" And I went, "Yeah." And she went, "What are y'all doing here?" And then she was like, "Are y'all shooting a movie here?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm shooting a film called Looper." And she went, "Looper?" And I went, "Yeah." And she went, "Y'all just made that up." I was like, "I really didn't."
The film, I've seen the film. We talk about the film, I've seen the
I'm not sure whether you've heard of this episode, this video resurfaced recently. This conversation took place 12 years ago and basically generated a complete shitstorm. And the result of this shitstorm was that Emily Blunt came out and issued this apology. I just need to address this head on, as my jaw was on the floor watching this clip from 12 years ago. I'm appalled that I would say something so insensitive, hurtful, and unrelated to whatever story I was trying to tell on a talk show. I've always considered myself someone who wouldn't dream of upsetting anyone, so whatever possessed me to say anything like this in that moment is unrecognizable to me or anything I stand for. And yet it happened, and I said it, and so I'm sorry for any hurt caused. I was absolutely old enough to know better. So are we back to Salem in 1692? Just look at the language. Appalled, possessed, unrecognizable to oneself. For a joke that she issued in a talk show 12 years ago, for which, if you followed along the conversation, she was very much prompted, right? Even the language of enormous was basically handed over to her. The remark about oversized meals, which of course we all recognize, it was handed to her. Now I wouldn't be a fool and go ahead and defending the joke, but this reaction just seems to me utterly overboard. And when I talk about the moral dynamics, I'm kind of interested in the social processes that must have prompted Emily Blunt to issue such an apology 12 years later. Unfortunately, we don't have the kind of social science that can carefully study exactly what the kind of conversations were, who said what in what context, but something bubbled up that became so powerful as to provoke her to issue this kind of apology. Now, what is going on here? And so in the last part of this talk, I want to now turn to analysis and talk about sort of like what is troubling me about this dynamics, where even I would say, relatively mild joke in a talk show becomes so unacceptable that a person has to apologize for that 12 years later. Where to start? How about some logic? The moralistic fallacy. Moralistic thinking is perhaps the most tempting about amusement. Moralistic claims and arguments are most prevalent here. Perhaps it is wrong to be amused at an offensive joke, not simply in virtue of the bad consequences of your amusement, such as hurtful laughter, but because, as some claim, simply to be amused at a sexist joke marks you as a sexist. We will suspend our qualms about the sweepingness of this claim and will grant it to the moralist for the sake of argument. Nevertheless, to infer that offensive jokes are never funny, or even that the humor is always diminished by the morally dubious qualities, would be to commit the moralistic fallacy. And of course, I'm giving a shout out here to our director of the Benson Center, who published this paper, I believe in 2000, with his lovely colleague Justin Daubs. I call it bullshit, says Kat Timpf. You can't joke about that. Why everything is funny, nothing is sacred, and we are all in this together. And so on one segment of this very beautiful book, she writes, and now I have double blocks, let me see where I can make it. Now many people believe that certain subjects are sacred, that you simply can't joke about something. The loudest voices in the room of our society say you can't joke about death or drama or poverty or illness. Serious, dark and difficult things must be handled carefully and absolutely never joked about, because it's the moral and respectful thing to do. It's a widely accepted standard. Some might even call it common decency. I'd call it bullshit. I've been through some awful stuff. If you don't believe me, just read this book and keep in mind that there's plenty of other stuff that I didn't even include. But the thing is, nothing I've ever been through has been made easier because people insisted on speaking carefully about it. If anything, the opposite is true. In my experience, and probably yours, our cultural expectation to speak solemnly about difficult things adds discomfort to the devastating. I would argue that societal policing of levity and humor limits our ability to heal, or worse, to make connections with one another through the shared experience. Life is hard enough without having to freak out that you're talking about it the wrong way. Why can't we all agree to make things easier by taking that pressure off ourselves? Now, originally, when I was conceiving this talk, I was thinking I would basically spend most of my time on that and kind of like talk about why humor is really, really important, why it has all these important effects to our bonding, community, ability to heal, to cope, to connect, to challenge, to open our minds, to create distance, heal, speak truth to power, liberate and release, open escapes, or simply to entertain. But I think there's something kind of like restricted about this kind of instrumental analysis here. And so I want to go a little bit beyond this and identify some more serious threat that I perceive in moralizing humor. Some people have made the arguments recently that humor even is a moral virtue. And so in this article by the two philosophers, Mark Alfano and Mandy Astola, they basically talk about why even a dark sense of humor is important. It regulates multiple emotions, such as chilling excessive contempt. We certainly admire people who have the ability to laugh at themselves. A sense of humor can help people to live well and flourish. And of course, you know, that is from the occasion when a Russian warship asked the few defenders of this island to surrender and received the response, Russian warship, go fuck yourself. All right. So I'm more than happy to concede Puritan excesses will really cost you. All right. The war on humor is not free. But again, I think it goes deeper than that. And so I want to push in my analysis beyond price. And in order to make this point the best way I can, I just look at, I'm going to shift to laughter for a second. There's a lot of research recently that shows why laughter has tremendous health benefits. In case you were wondering like what the activity is on the right, this is laugh yoga. That seems apparently like a thing now. So where people like, gather together and laughing is contagious, and so by laughing together, you have a lot of health benefits. And so, we get the, it reduces stress, it increases brain function, it improves mental, emotional health, whatever. Sure. It has a lot of health benefits. But is that all? Here is a section from a prominent book on laughter by the philosopher Henry Bergson. He says, the first point to which attention should be called And he starts this book this way. The first point to which attention should be called is that the comic does not exist outside the pale of what is distinctly human. You may laugh at an animal, but only because you have detected in it some human attitude or expression. It is strange that so important a fact, such as a simple one too, has not attracted to the greater degree the attention of the philosophers. Many other people have made this point. Nietzsche makes this point. Many people make this point, where they want to draw our attention to such an important a fact, but it's not a fact. Why do I bring this up? I will say in just a minute. But if you don't believe me, just read, some of Franz de Waal's wonderful depictions of the zoo that he conducts his research on. Mama's Last Hug is his latest book, and there he reports upon numerous occasions where basically chimps engage in mockery, comedy, not just laughter. One occasion that I remember is sort of like where the alpha chimp actually allows a baby chimp to chase him around in kind of like embarrassment, and it is clearly a kind of like case of self-mockery. Everybody clearly understands what is going on. Peekaboo. We find humor in the earliest depictions that we have. On the left you find a cave painting that apparently, according to these archaeologists, depicts runners mocking a jogger. I don't know exactly how that is, but that's what I came across with. Humor truly is a cultural universal. We find it in the first instances of human interaction. It is there in our closest biological relatives. I put this book, Homo Ludens, by Johann Husinger, on the right because this book really, really impressed me in its analysis of play. It's something that is very, very, very deep. Husinger in this book actually explains in a very interesting way why many cultural phenomena are kind of like downstream of our just playful nature. A nature, of course, that we can observe in animals quite easily. And so the tendency of moralizing humor and then to overshoot, I want to say, does not just deprive us of some benefits that humor and laughter might bestow of us. It might not just take away some of the health benefits of yoga, but it really runs against something that is deep in our nature. And so in case you were ever wondering how to explain this guy's complaints about morality being life-denying, I would say you can do worse than using moralizing humor as a case study. Now, I think this cuts both ways. And so I want to kind of end, before I'm wrapping up, with also some encouraging remarks about humor, in case you were getting too concerned about the tendency of excessive moralizing to undermine it. This is, of course, Galen. We talk about humor today and not the four humors any longer. The four humors are basically like these sort of like fluids that sort of like control everything in your health and your mood. Of course, completely debunked medical theory. But so like when the four humors were in good balance, that medical theory talked about being in good humor. And so we just took that term, humor, that survived from that. And so if that's right, then what we should expect is push and push back. And so like the tendency of excessive moralizing to intrude into something that runs as deep in our nature as humor should expect to get some pushback. And so I think sort of like the what we can observe in human history, in the history of excessive moralizing, is a kind of like a little bit of a pendulum, if you wish. It kind of like it starts intruding into aspects of our life and our nature that are very, very deep to us, and then these aspects of our nature push it back, and in some ways, sort of like we correct for it. So perhaps a little bit of less doom and gloom here. I didn't want to introduce moralizing humor to make you too worried here. But I want to use it as an example to understand the kind of like broader phenomenon I have in mind. And so let me wrap up. I'm probably like over time because of the technical issue, but let me just try to be quick here. So what is the point of all this? To give decisive arguments? Well, I didn't give any arguments as far as I can recall. What did I do? I started with an observation. I started talking about morality's tendency to subjugate every aspect of social life, and then I kind of wanted to focus on a specific instance of being excessive. I call these Puritan excesses, and I wanted to ask a question about these, the question of whether these excesses are endogenous or exogenous to the system, and my answer was they are endogenous. So what do I take away from this? It's a direction for inquiry or a research program. When morality goes too far, what is going on? Just a mob of moralizers who didn't get the memo? Unfortunately, no. A feature, not a bug. Puritan excesses partly emanate from the way the morality system works. So it is systemic moralism. That's just as well say the insatiable moralizer. Morality is just great, an unblemished blessing, the final word on everything. But some of us question this and ask, under what conditions did man invent the value judgments good and evil, and what value do they themselves have? Have they, up to now, obstructed or promoted human flourishing? Are they a sign of distress, poverty, and the degeneration of life? Or on the contrary, do they reveal the fullness, strength, and will of life, its courage, its confidence, its future? Now, of course, some of you will recognize that these are the opening sections from Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals. And if I have to find a depiction of the kind of thing that Nietzsche would admire, I can't do worse than finding this cactus in Tucson, basically living there on pure rock. I was actually trying to climb up there a little bit and just see where the dirt possibly can be that this cactus is climbing on. But it is thriving even under severely adverse circumstances. Curb your moral enthusiasm, so less moral medicine turns into moral poison and you overdose. Now if you ask how, why exactly, the book is coming, I promise. So I want to thank you very much. All right, Brendan, well, why don't we go ahead?
Thanks, Dan. A couple questions. I'll just start with this one. What is moralizing?
So when I gave the presentation a year ago, I was focusing quite a bit on moralizing. What I'm hoping to do is to gesture in a direction and to highlight some phenomena that we can recognize. What I cannot give you is a definition, a specific theory, but I can say a couple things about it. So first of all, I would want to say that moralizing is something that is very reputation driven. I think when we look at how this works, I think it is quite clear that the way moralizing works and exerts some force is by in some way damaging our reputation. It puts our reputation on the line. And that's also kind of like where its sting is coming from. So I think it is a very, very reputation-centered activity. And so when you guys wrote, your wonderful book on grandstanding, I thought, yes, you had a very nice point about, the uses and abuses of moral talk, but I thought the phenomenon that you're talking about, so like reputation-based engagement in moral discourse, is kind of like what is going on there, what gives this entire enterprise some power. And so I think if that's correct, and that would only of course be one aspect of moralizing, but if that is an aspect of moralizing, it would also provide some explanation of why moralizing has the inherent tendency to overshoot. Because of like once our reputations get on the line, and so like once we have to protect and promote our reputations, it is very natural to kind of like do that by becoming more and more sensitive about moral matters, and by kind of like distinguishing yourself in some way by casting moral aspersion on other people. So I would say the kind of like reputation dynamics is one aspect of moralizing. I want to say I want to give another. I want to highlight another aspect, and I think so like moralizing clearly is a very passion, emotion driven undertaking. It is not just a purely kind of like cognitive analysis of like saying giving a moral score to somebody, but it is something that is very much driven by our passions. And so moralizing tends to go where the passions can get engaged, right? I mean, one of the remarkable things I find in my observation of like what we do and what we do not moralize is that the things we moralize are often, even in the understanding of the moralizer, not something that would deserve that type of priority, even in their own terms, right? So when you moralize how certain practices affect a certain community, let's say, you would think that the welfare of that community is a central concern to you. And so whenever somebody can make a case that some other phenomenon bears on the welfare of that community, that should really arouse your attention. But often these things are very boring and are not very well connected to our passions. And so they get very, very little attention, right? I mean, so when we had very, very strong attention to the welfare of minority communities in this country, I was always just amazed about how little, for instance, our attention focused on features that affect these communities in a clearly documented way. Nobody talked about lead piping very much in 2020 when I was in Milwaukee. And yet Milwaukee at that point had one of the worst prevalence of lead pipes in any city. And we know for sure that lead in water has devastating effects on brain development. It would have been a no-brainer to point out the devastating effects of lead piping. But what do you do in response to something like lead piping? You have to attend a lot of boring meetings. You have to kind of like agitate, if you wish, for the long haul. You have to kind of like closely monitor the progress or lack of progress that is being made. And none of these things really engages our passions very much. And so none of these things that sort of like, on their own terms should arise the attention of people who are particularly concerned about minority flourishing. And so I think so like a lot of the dynamics that we can observe about moralizing can be best explained in virtue of the connection or lack of connection to strong passions. I'm talking too long, I realize, so maybe I should just stop. I have more things to say, but Dan.
So I want to make sure that I've got the structure of this talk and the book, and then I have a question.
Cool.
If I'm right. So if I understand you, the book is on Puritan excesses of moralizing quite generally.
Yes.
And you said you're not so interested in the philosophy of humor.
That's right.
You're using it as an object lesson, and
That's
it's
right.
obviously it's a good
Yeah.
object lesson for it, and and one that comes to mind, one that gives a lot of examples. So is that the sort of structure of?
That's exactly the idea.
Okay.
Yep.
So I do think it's a good example. It occurs to me that there are some peculiarities about the case that maybe you have thought of, but I don't think that this makes it not a good example for you to use in talking about excessive moralizing. But I wonder if you've thought about it.
Okay.
So moralizing, excuse me. Comedy,
Yeah.
unlike some other things that we also moralize,
Yeah.
such as cooking.
Cooking.
To take another of your examples. There's excessive according to me and according to you, there's excessive moralizing everywhere,
Yeah.
practically. But there seems to be something distinctive about comedy. I want to suggest to you,
Yeah.
if you agree. And that is that, unlike cooking, say, transgression seems to be close to the essence of the funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are these famous philosophical theories of humor, and they all get something right, and they all get a lot wrong. So incongruity has something to do with humor. But release, superiority, transgression, those are the other things that philosophers and psychologists have pointed to in norm violation as being really rich sources of humor. And this seems right as long as we don't make it a theory about necessary and sufficient conditions for something being funny. But doesn't that suggests to me that there's a way in which comedy is downstream from moralizing, though of course we also moralize about it. People also moralize about it. That is especially because we feel ourselves constrained by these moral norms that tell us when and what we can say and do. It seems like one of the functions of humor is to be a bit of a release valve on that allows us to, for instance, ridicule rather than practices about which that we object to, correctly or incorrectly. Of course, it can go in both directions. But do you see what I'm sort of getting at here?
Absolutely. And so I take it basically as a kind of like friendly suggestion, and I think you're absolutely right that there's something kind of like peculiar about moralizing humor that might make it different from other instances. Now I have to think about sort of like whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for using it as a sort of like my anchoring case study. But while I'm thinking about this, let me share another thought that I had when you were raising your question. I mean, there is surely a reason why humor in particular is so offensive to the moralizer, in which cooking, for instance, never could, because humor really does provide a kind of like counter pressure or pushback against a lot of moralizing. There is probably nothing like poking fun or ridiculing that kind of like in some way puts the moralizer in check. And so it's not surprising that when you read accounts of the Puritans, that they were especially anxious about humor and kind of perceived it as an especially potent anti-moralizing force. And so I think that's quite correct, and of course, it nicely connects to some of the theories of humor that say, like, it has in part the function of release and distance, taking the weight off. So I think that's all correct. Now, I would probably say that, humorizing, if that's a word, and moralizing co-evolved. I hope sort of like my points about how far humor stretches in our history, in our nature, makes the point that sort of like humor might have been there before moralizing entered the scene. I don't know. I have to think about that. But I think sort of like moralizing and humorizing are surely kind of like forces that in some way kind of like pull against each other. And it's kind of, I mean, it's, it has many features. It has many features that kind of like really go at the heart of how moralizing works. Again, if I'm correct in what I said to Brandon earlier, that moralizing has a lot to do with reputation management and the passions, you can kind of like see why humorizing it is exactly kind of like undermining the effectiveness of that. If the moralizer wants to get at you by taking down your reputation, right? So like the sting that the moralizing has is by taking down your reputation. Now, when other people come in and make jokes about it, there's a certain kind of like solidarity, I wish, that sort of like comes in there, and sort of like the reputational damage in some way is exactly like taken away. So all of this is saying that yes, I completely agree with you that there's something special about humor as a case study. I gotta kind of think about whether that is in some way. Whether there's something I have to say about using this as my case study, I got to think about that. All right, please, yes.
So I wonder if there's something that might have to do with truth in the tension between the moralizer and humor. So there obviously they can be you can understand why if there's a moralizing process, it might be most threatened by humor.
Yeah.
And why might that be? Is if something is over-moralizing, are they covering up some aspect of truth that humor has a way, is there some aspect of truth that humor gets at in a piercing manner that is a threat to the moralizer?
Yeah. I would think so. I would think so. I mean, another aspect that I think is very central to moralizing, in my kind of like wishy-washy gesturing of what moralizing is, I think in moralizing what you observe is a very distinctive effect on attention, right? When you moralize, you kind of have to, basically when you moralize X, what you're saying to your larger community is like, everybody stop doing what they're doing and pay attention to this, okay? To just carry on what you're doing and paying no attention to this is not okay, okay? This needs our attention. It is now a business for everybody, okay? Nobody can kind of like just, put that on the sideline. Which is why, as I tried to outline in my previous talk, the ire of the moralizer is often much more directed at the bystanders who simply want to remain bystanders than actually the offenders. It's often like you do not get to stay out of this. All right? It's like, yes, you didn't do anything wrong, but you have to come in here and join the chorus or the mob or whatnot to really come down on this. And humor, of course, has a kind of like weird way of mixing up attentions, right? It kind of like mixes everything and suddenly puts things in connections that go in very different directions. Now, I'm not entirely sure I'm meeting with your question, but I think I'm in agreement with you. But maybe you can correct me a little bit.
What is it that the moralizer so fears about humor?
Yeah.
Why do they have to really focus on that to try to shut it down? It must be a threat.
Yes. And again, I think it is quite easy to see at least a number of reasons why it is a threat. Of course, it's not a complete picture, but it's sort of like it diffuses a certain kind of like seriousness. It diffuses a certain kind of like, prioritizing this at the expense of everything else. It kind of like confuses sort of like the clear battle lines here of sort of like who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side. So I think there's quite a lot to be said, and I think I have to think a little bit more about this to sort of like identify exactly why humor is such a threat to moralism. So I think you had your hand up for quite some time, and Michael as well.
Two things, one which is a digression and one which I think isn't. The first, movies of the 2010s, that's the age of Marvel. I'd be very skeptical of the argument that there's no appetite for comedy in popular culture of the 2010s.
Yeah.
Like, what's a funnier movie, The Avengers or Titanic? I think, given that you're one includes in the book, I'm skeptical of the argument that the diminution of comedy as a genre equates to a distaste for humor.
Yeah.
That's a period of blockbuster action movies, directed by Joss Whedon, the Taika Waititis. I think Marvel's problem, if you want to use that story.
Yeah.
The thing that's kind of more interesting to you for your argument, as opposed to a fact nitpick, is that I really want to know where you draw the line. And I get that you're dancing around that, but without it, it's hard for me to see who you're arguing against.
Yeah.
No one, not even Rawls, thinks we can live under orthodox Rawlsianism. Orthodox Rawls is impossible, and everyone knows that. But I also don't think you're a moral nihilist. There are clearly places where what you're describing as moralizing is okay. You're giving examples of them.
Yeah.
So, if we live in a system where we're judging people on what we perceive to be their ethics, and judgments of people in the aggregate constitute a reputation, can you do this project without trying to figure out where things fall? And how do you evaluate, sort of in general terms, what separates acceptable moralizing from unacceptable moralizing?
So about the first point about sort of like your contesting the data about comedy withdrawing from Hollywood.
Maybe humor.
Or humor. I have to confess, I'm kind of like in a pickle here because I don't understand most of humor. My wife makes fun of me. I'm basically like, whenever we watch something funny, I just sit there in silence. And I just don't get it. I just don't get it. So, I'm convinced I'm on the spectrum. So I have this tendency to over-theorize, trying to understand something that just doesn't come intuitively to me. And because so much of comedy doesn't come intuitively to me, I don't watch very much. But in defense, that's what many, professional comedians are saying, right? Seinfeld, I remember, said that. Many comedians have said, very prominent comedians, that the kind of like script that would have been like, off the shelves, like 20 years ago is now nobody wants to touch it, right? But again, I think I sort of like I just defer I just defer to some people who have observed these trends, and if they are a thing, yeah, sure, that's great. My larger thesis would be it's kind of like an ebb and flow, if you wish, right? So like it's kind of like there's going to be like periods when sort of like over moralizing is going to have the upper hand, and then sort of like this is going to prompt a kind of like reaction, maybe like where people push back, and then also sort of like I do as you said, I'm not a nihilist. I worry about the overreaction on the other side too. I mean, I kind of worry that the moralizing excesses to which people then respond with like not being that interested in moralizing anymore could on the other hand have some things we also don't want. I mean, I'm a little bit worried about that. There's going to be the backlash, if you wish, might then in turn go too far, which of course again might sort of like prompt increasing moralizing. I don't know. I mean, in general, so like if my general position here is correct, the phenomenon I'm trying to observe and understand is not something that just happened the last couple of years, but it's kind of like a constant, if you wish. We would find this kind of like battle across the ages. Now on the more philosophical point about where I draw the line, I have to say I have no idea. I have no idea, and I know that the philosophical temperament now would like to jump to principles and rules and try to figure out the conditions under which it is moralizing humor is okay and under what conditions moralizing humor is not okay. I have very little confidence that this is something we can pull off. I just don't believe it. I think it is a fool's enterprise. And I can only kind of like say, look at the analogies. So go back to power, right? It's a kind of like it's an unstable situation, right? We kind of like unless we want to be complete anarchists, we think that some kind of power has to be bestowed on somebody to keep order. But of course, as soon as we have, granted some agency power, we have that abuse problem. And I think there is no Goldilocks. There is no to this point and no farther. Even if we could identify such a point, it would of course be immediately exploited by practitioners in the game. New forms of power abuse would come up. So my general picture is like I'm talking about even if we were to get the balance right for a moment, it would be inherently unstable. And I don't have any principles or theory about even where the balance is right. I just have very little confidence that that's something we can do. All right, Michael. Yes.
Well, so I was going to comment on the earlier question about why moralizers would be afraid of humor. And so, what do you think of this? Humor has the potential to reveal people's attitudes involuntarily.
Yeah.
So, if you tell a joke that is like making fun of the people who are against murder,
yeah,
nobody laughs. Okay, but if you tell a joke that's making fun of the woke people,
yeah,
and then a bunch of people laugh,
yeah,
that appears to reveal that they, really
yeah,
didn't agree with the woke people,
yeah,
and it's involuntary.
yeah,
So you can't intimidate people
yeah,
into not finding it funny,
yeah,
right? So they can't control.
yeah.
So you might be able to intimidate people into shutting up and not criticizing your views.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah.
So let me try to get at your question, but let me come from a little bit of a distance. So I don't really have a very robust background in philosophy of humor. It's just humor seemed to me like a very interesting example, a case study of over moralizing. But I thought now since I'm talking about humor, I better get a little bit of background there. So I started frantically checking out overviews in the philosophy of humor, and I've even contacted some people in the philosophy of humor so they can correct me about all the mistakes I'm making. But another thing I've been doing, and that's kind of I have to say, that was really Eves. I went on the internet and I checked out the deep recesses of really beyond the pale humor, and I gotta say it's pretty disgusting. So when you say I mean, my wife hates that. But when you say there is no humor about murdering, no, there's plenty of it. There's humor about raping babies, and I mean they even I don't want to I'm not going to go there. All right, I'm not going to go there. But there are these types apparently. They're like these they often call it cringe humor or whatnot. But there are these types that just they push and push and push. And I have to say, at some point, I'm like, you know, I'm almost becoming a moralizer at that point, and so I'm not, you know, I'm not. Again, you know, if you expected a, you know, blanket defense of humor, don't look to me. But of course, what you say about the involuntary aspect is quite important, and that's sort of like why, you know, why humor is so. It's just very. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, laughter and amusement just are not under our control in the same way as many other things are, and so it is, and that's why, you know, that's why playing with humor is to some extent playing with fire. It is a you know, disruptive engagement, I suppose, and you know, some of the more gifted cringe comedians that I was able to find choke with that, right? So like they constantly, you know, they tail, you know, it's just they just, I don't know what the right metaphor is, but they rub it, you know, it's just one and an and one more and one more, and so like they often turn meta. And kind of like it's like, oh, you found this funny. Right? I mean, they're often very skillful at this. They kind of like, I mean, you know, watch Louis C.K. Right? I mean, he is incredibly gifted at this. Kind of like he's telling a joke and everybody laughs, and then suddenly nobody laughs. And then he goes like, oh, I see, you were laughing at this, but now you're not laughing at that. And so, you know, of course, that is quite humorous too. And I think so. Like, and I'm not entirely sure whether I'm connecting to your question entirely, but I have to say that I think so. Like, one of the reasons why many find over moralizing of humor so what's the right word? Hard to take is precisely because of this involuntary aspect, right? You kind of like you kind of take something against people that in some way is not exactly under their voluntary control, and it has a kind of sting to it that might be especially intense because of that. But am I kind of getting in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned the jokes about murder and stuff, and so I'm not saying that there aren't jokes about murder, but like at a certain point people wouldn't find them funny.
Yeah.
Like most normal people would.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's an appearance, at least, that sometimes there's an appearance that if you laugh, that shows that you believe something.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's.
So like the joke that I mentioned earlier, where how many feminists does it take to change a light bulb? That's not funny.
Yes.
And then if you laugh at that answer, that shows that you understand something about feminists.
Yeah.
And if you actually did not know the premise of the joke, if you actually had no idea what I was talking about, you would not laugh. You would I don't get it.
Yeah.
So the fact you got the joke shows something.
Yeah.
So I think there could be cases where it's an illusion.
Yeah.
So some of the things that Louis C.K. would say, where he would say, "Oh, you laughed about that." He's probably relying on an illusion, right?
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, you laughed about my jokes about baby killing,
Yes.
so you must be okay with baby killing." Like that's not correct.
Yes.
Right? But some of the times it really is correct that it reveals the illusion you have.
Yeah. It's very, again, I'm really hoping that I'm now connecting to a bunch of awesome and interesting philosophers who are working in the philosophy of humor. In fact, I invited somebody over to Milwaukee to give a talk soon, because I just find this fascinating. And I have to say, I don't exactly know what to think about many of these things. I mean, to me, often kind of like in this wishy-washy field, it seems to me like what you want to say is like, this is often true somewhere here, sometimes it's not true over there. Sometimes kind of like, your amusement reveals certain kind of beliefs that you have. Yes, that seems true. But sometimes it just also does not. I mean, I have to say, so like, you know, I can be totally amused by jokes that sort of like rely on presuppositions I just absolutely don't believe. Not even so like in a moment, or not even implicitly, or whatever. But it's still kind of funny. So ein weites Feld. Ein weites Feld. Okay, Ishra, please.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I was wondering to what extent it's really the moral evaluation that's a problem, and to what extent it's things like trying to stop people from saying something or doing something.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, of course, we can morally evaluate all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I can find a joke distasteful, but think that,
Yeah.
well, they have no taste, so they're just going to tell distasteful jokes, and I'm not trying to stop them. So in some way, I'm morally evaluating it, and badly. I think that maybe only a person with very crude sensibilities would have that joke, or find it funny. One example that occurs to me was a few years ago, some journalist, I believe it was, had discovered this website that physicians had started, and it was supposedly for them to exchange information about really difficult cases.
Yeah.
But actually what they were doing was making fun of patients in a pretty psychopathic way. So one time somebody had posted this picture of a patient of his that had nailed his thumb with a nail accidentally, and people were posting comments such as, he nailed it, you know, and everybody laughed.
Yeah.
So really kind of psychopathic. So anyway, so I'm seeing this and I'm thinking, gee, these people are psychopaths. But then I'm thinking, well, like philosophers, you know, have a page on Facebook basically ridiculing undergraduate students, right? The darndest things that philosophy students say.
That's terrible. There are so many pages. Which one? What's it called?
How
dare they?
The thing is, you know, so I just kind of thought, well, you know, maybe people just kind of need some sort of outlet, and so for professors, the target is going to be the students, and for doctors, it's patients.
Yeah.
And I know later I discovered that for IT people, it's users. So they have these abbreviations. You know, sometimes they would say to someone, "You have ID 10T error," and that's actually idiot. There's no such error. And they have other things. You know, so another one was CBE, which stands actually for carbon-based error. That's the error. That's where you're coming from. And so, you know, so I kind of thought, okay, well, you know, I still think that it's pretty distasteful, and maybe everything that we do, you know, with the undergrad students, I try not to participate. It's also kind of distasteful. But I'm not really trying to stop anyone from making those jokes. So, you know, I don't know if I'm engaging in moralizing, you know, in that sense. So I guess this is what I, you know, kind of my question is, I mean, is the problem really, you know, the moral evaluation that you think people are giving a moral assessment where maybe that's not needed, or it's counterproductive, or whatever, or is it that they're basically trying to stop some comedian from putting on a show or something like that?
Absolutely. I think there is a very large question in your question, if I hear you right, which is kind of like the phenomenon I'm targeting, moralizing, whether that is really intimately connected to maybe the more pristine phenomena of moral evaluation or proper moral engagement. And of course, you know, many people want to say, well, moralizing is a, you know, intentional derogative that describes a kind of like very bad manifestation of, you know, bringing morality to bear on people. And of course, it's a bad thing. You know, who would disagree with that? But the kind of like pristine, you know, domain of moral evaluation and moral theorizing is utterly untouched. by what I have to say. And I want to say no, not so fast. And I was hoping to give a talk about exactly that issue last week in Alistair's ethics seminar. And I have a talk, but it's a big one. And so I recognize, so I basically, the target of the talk is like, even, I want to make a case, at least, that if you agree with me on my concerns about moralizing, excessive moralizing, it does not just leave unaffected the kind of like more pristine areas of moral engagement. Let's use that word sort of like as a contrastive. But that's going to be a big one. You know, that's going to be there's going to be a chapter in the book where I kind of like have to explain so like why my target phenomenon bears on any kind of like assessment on what, you know, the moral philosophers might have been interested in.
Can you just ask a follow-up?
I also had to say something else about sort of like your point, but how strict is our limitation on time?
Well, there was the technical error, so
Okay.
So we're not. I won't be too strict.
All right. Can I say something? Can I say something else, and then you can come back, Ishra. And I'm not sure exactly whether it connects to what you said, but here's one thing that I have observed about my own amusement structure. It doesn't really correlate very well with my evaluative moral beliefs. It doesn't correlate. I can find things utterly unfunny about which I have very weak moral reservations, and I can find things still very funny about which I have very strong moral reservations. It doesn't quite correlate. I would say, for instance, about the bear baiting, I would genuinely not find that funny. I could not, and I could not look at this, and to me that would just, and the reason is not because I have now some very strong beliefs about animal cruelty. I just wouldn't find it genuinely funny, and yet I can. You could still make some. So if I ever find this book in some used bookstore, truly tasteless jokes, I'm sure I'm going to find some jokes in there funny, which utterly offend my moral beliefs. So it seems to be kind of like two different worlds. But you had a follow-up.
Yeah, so the main part of my question was basically about the extent to which you include not just assessment, but things like trying to silence people or stop them from joking in your understanding of moralizing, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, because one issue is the distinction between proper moral evaluation and moralizing, and maybe, it's interesting to ask whether there is a distinction, as maybe my question was kind of assuming. But even if we grant that, there's still a question of, is it a problem to moralize anything, jokes or whatever, if you're not going to stop anyone from joking, right? I mean, you have your opinion and you think that's a morally distasteful joke, but maybe you also think that people can tell morally distasteful jokes. So is that a problem, or is the problem really basically trying to stop people from telling jokes?
I mean, I gotta think about this.
Okay.
I gotta think about this. My initial inclination is to think that, so like when we moralize humor, we're not even. I don't think the moralizer so much as even trying to shut up humor. I think that's. In kind of like my cynical reading of moralizing, I think the moralizer often quite relishes in the offender and pushes demoralizing, not so much as to prevent a certain kind of behavior, but sort of kind of like to boost your own reputation. So it's kind of like, you would of course never put it in those terms as a moralizer, but you're quite thankful to these, renegades out there about which you can express your opprobrium, thereby, boosting your moral score. I'm kind of like, I'm sort of like one of the things that sort of like keeps me fascinated about moralizing in my particular cynical way is that I often observe that the kind of moralizing employed is such an ineffective way of accomplishing the kind of goals that allegedly are driving the moralizer, even to the recognition of the moralizer, and yet it bothers the moralizer so little to make the kind of like strategy adjustments, if you wish, to do something more effective. And so there's a kind of like weird disconnect, if you wish, which kind of makes me suspect that what is driving moralizing is not the drive to make the world a better place. I don't believe that. All right, I think Justin, you had your question.
Yeah, I was thinking about something along the lines of what Iskra asked you. So let me see. So I guess I wasn't sure what you were trying to say was endogenous to the morality system. So was it, so Iskra had this distinction between just sort of like the bare possibility of making a moral evaluation of anything, which I think that's easy to see how that'd be endogenous to the system. And then on the other hand, there's like that evaluation having social and cultural purchase and like people being inclined to use it and so on. I think that's not so easy to see why it would be endogenous to the morality system. I didn't really understand your case for if that's what you were trying to say, why it would be endogenous.
Yeah. So I think again, I think that so like there is there's a lot of work to be done. I have to say something meaningful and informative about what I have in mind here about the morality system and its operation, and to make it plausible that the kind of like forces at work are also the kind of forces that push it over its limits. And I have to do this while kind of while being skeptical about clear demarcations. Philosophically, I just don't. I think whatever that moralizing thing is going to be a unbelievably complex social thing. Like, all these people getting involved in some way, making statements for sure, but I think often making a move, if you wish, in the moralizing game that is not even statement or evaluation bound. I think especially like with regard to humor, I think often so like the moralizing that takes place is often just for somebody to turn around and walk away, right? In some way that is moralizing. You don't have to express a statement, or you just you say like ha 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 or something like that, or you simply don't invite these people to your birthday parties any longer, or you don't with Emily Blunt, which I suppose not being such a great fan of her anymore. I don't know. So it's there's all this complex stuff going on. And I want to. I sort of like it's going to be a struggle for for somebody like me to be able to grab on enough of a kind of like unity and cohesion of this, so I can make my endogenous claims while being skeptical about this being a kind of like unified affair. So that's going to be a tricky challenge. Now, I'm not entirely sure I connected to your question.
That's okay.
Okay.
I think this is a good time for
All right.
us to thank our speakers.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you. Thank you very much.